She saved a man in a suit from dying on a rainy night, never imagining he'd spent months secretly watching her. What she thought was a simple act of kindness was actually the first move in a far more dangerous game. Margaret Hayes pressed her back against the cold concrete wall, watching the rain turn the downtown streets into rivers of neon light. The expensive suit stumbled past her bench again, third time in an hour. He kept muttering the same words over and over. Lost everything. Just lost everything. His tie hung loose around his neck like a noose he'd forgotten to tighten. She'd seen plenty of broken men in her 5 years on these streets. But this one was different. The way he walked toward the traffic, not caring about the cars speeding through the intersection. She knew that walk. She'd almost taken it herself once. The storm had everyone else running for shelter, but Margaret stayed put. Someone had to watch. Someone had to care. That's what her mother always said before the sickness took her. "Maggie, someone's got to care, even when the world stops caring back." The man in the suit stopped at the curb. A city bus roared past, missing him by inches. He didn't even flinch, just stood there, swaying like a tree about to fall. The next vehicle coming was an 18-wheeler, its headlights cutting through the rain like angry eyes. Margaret dropped her cardboard sign and ran. "Hey!" She grabbed his arm just as he stepped into the street. The truck's horn blasted so loud it hurt her ears. She pulled him back so hard they both crashed onto the sidewalk, her knees scraping against the concrete. "What the hell are you trying to do?" He looked at her with eyes that seemed to see right through everything. "I told you. I lost everything." His words slurred together, whiskey breath mixing with the rain. "My company, my family, everything that mattered. Nothing matters that much." She helped him sit on her bench, the one she claimed 3 winters ago. "I've been where you are. Trust me. This isn't the answer." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't understand. I'm Robert Blackwood. I built an empire and I watched it crumble because I trusted the wrong person. My own business partner stole everything while I was..." He trailed off, staring at his hands. Margaret had heard the name before. Everyone had. Blackwood Industries was one of those companies that owned half the buildings in the city, but looking at this broken man, she couldn't connect him to those newspaper photos of the confident CEO. "What happened?" "Marcus, my partner of 20 years. He's been stealing from us for months, maybe years. When I confronted him today, he laughed. Said I'd never prove it because he'd covered his tracks too well. Then he told me something that..." Robert's voice broke completely. "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 2 years because of lies he planted in her head about me. Lies I never knew existed until today." The rain was soaking through Margaret's worn jacket, but she didn't move. This man needed someone to listen, and she'd learned that sometimes listening was the most important thing you could do. "Where is she now? Your daughter?" "London. She moved there after our last fight. Said she couldn't stand to be in the same country as me." His hands shook as he tried to light a cigarette. Margaret took the lighter and did it for him. "Thank you. I don't even know your name." "Margaret. But everyone calls me Maggie." She watched him take a long drag, noting how his breathing steadied slightly. "And you're not going to lose everything. Not if you're still breathing. Easy to say when you don't have 200 employees who'll lose their jobs, or a family legacy that goes back 4 generations. Robert looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time. "Though I suppose you know something about losing everything too." She nodded. "Lost my house when my husband died. Medical bills ate through our savings like cancer ate through his body. Lost my job when I couldn't stop crying long enough to function. Lost my friends when I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore." The words came easier than they used to, but I didn't lose myself. Took me a while to figure that out. Robert was quiet for so long, she thought he'd fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm 58 years old and I don't know who I am without my company. You're someone who built something from nothing once. That doesn't just disappear." Margaret stood up, her knees protesting. "Come on, let's get you somewhere dry. I can't go home. My wife, ex-wife, will have heard by now. She'll want to gloat." He struggled to stand, the alcohol making him unsteady. "And I can't face the office tomorrow, looking at all those people knowing I failed them." "Then don't go home. Not tonight." Margaret helped him walk toward the shelter she knew would be open. "But don't give up either. Men like you don't know how to quit. That's probably what got you in this mess, but it's also what'll get you out." They walked in silence through the empty streets. The rain was easing up, but the damage was done. Both of them were soaked to the bone. Margaret's shoes squelched with every step, and Robert's expensive suit clung to him like a second skin. "Why did you help me?" he asked as they reached the community center. "You don't know me." Margaret paused at the door. "Because someone helped me once when I needed it. And because—" she hesitated, then decided on the truth. "Because I've been watching you walk past my bench for 3 months. Every morning at 7:15, every evening at 6:30. You always nod at me like I'm a person worth acknowledging. Most people look right through me." Robert's face changed. "You're the lady from the park bench. I always wondered about your story." "Not much of a story. Just survival one day at a time." She pushed open the door. "But tomorrow that could change for both of us." 3 days later, Margaret was feeding pigeons with day-old bread from the bakery when a man in an expensive grey suit approached her bench. He walked with the kind of confidence that money bought, carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than most people made in a month. "Excuse me, are you Margaret Hayes?" She looked up warily. Men in suits meant trouble, usually. Social services, police, someone wanting to move her along. Depends who's asking. "My name is David Richardson. I'm an attorney representing Robert Blackwood." He sat down beside her without being invited, which immediately put her on edge. "Mr. Blackwood has asked me to find you. Is he okay?" The question came out before she could stop it. She'd been worried when he hadn't appeared at his usual times the past few days. "He's recovering." The events of that night shook him quite deeply. "He wanted me to thank you personally for what you did." David reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. "He also wanted me to give you this." Margaret stared at the envelope like it might bite her. "I don't want his money." "It's not money, well, not exactly." David's smile was genuine, which surprised her. "Mr. Blackwood is a man who believes in repaying debts. He feels he owes you his life. He doesn't owe me anything." Anyone would have done the same thing. "Actually, that's where you're wrong. The security camera footage from that night shows at least 12 people walked past him during those 3 hours. You were the only one who stopped." David held out the envelope again. "Please, just read it." Margaret took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive paper, the kind she remembered from her old life. Robert's handwriting was neat, controlled, nothing like the broken man she'd pulled from the street. Margaret read the letter twice before looking up at David. "He's serious about this. Mr. Blackwood doesn't make jokes about business or personal matters. He's had a background check run, found your previous employment history. You worked as a customer service manager for 15 years before—" He paused delicately. "Before my life fell apart." Margaret folded the letter carefully. "What kind of job?" "Community liaison position. The company is implementing a new social responsibility program, and Mr. Blackwood believes someone with your experience would be invaluable in connecting with people who need help most." The irony wasn't lost on her. "He wants to hire a homeless woman to help other homeless people. He wants to hire someone who understands both sides of the equation, someone who's lived through real hardship but hasn't lost their compassion." David stood up, straightening his suit. "The apartment is available immediately if you want to see it. The job offer stands regardless of your decision about housing." Margaret looked around the park that had been her world for so long. Mrs. Chen was setting up her cart to sell newspapers. Tommy was walking his dog the same route every morning. Sarah was settling in at her usual spot by the fountain, already arranging her cardboard sign. "What about them?" She nodded toward her street family. "What about the people here who depend on each other?" "That's exactly the kind of thinking Mr. Blackwood hopes you'll bring to the position. You could do more to help them with resources and connections than you ever could from this bench." The offer was tempting, more than tempting. But Margaret had learned to be suspicious of things that seemed too good to be true. "Why do I feel like there's something you're not telling me?" David's professional smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Blackwood's situation is complicated. The issues with his business partner have created some legal challenges. There may be publicity, and not all of it will be positive. Being associated with him right now could be difficult." "What kind of legal challenges?" "The kind that involve federal investigations and possible criminal charges. Nothing that implicates Mr. Blackwood directly, but the media doesn't always make such distinctions." David handed her a business card. Think about it. Take your time, but don't take too long, mister. Blackwood could use someone like you in his corner right now. After he left, Margaret sat on her bench holding the letter and business card. Around her, the familiar rhythm of street life continued. But something had shifted. The safety of invisibility she'd wrapped around herself like a blanket was starting to feel more like a prison. Sarah approached, her curiosity evident. "Who was the suit, Maggie?" "Someone offering me a job." The words felt strange in her mouth. "So you gonna take it?" Margaret looked at the letter again, thinking about Robert Blackwood's broken voice that rainy night, about the way he'd nodded at her every morning for months, treating her like a person when most people saw through her completely. "I don't know yet, but I think I'm going to find out." That evening, Margaret walked past the Blackwood Industries building for the first time. It was a gleaming tower of glass and steel, reaching toward the sky like a monument to ambition. Security guards in the lobby, people in expensive clothes rushing in and out, everyone looking important and purposeful. She pressed her hand against the cool glass of the front window and wondered if she was crazy to even consider this. Inside that building was a world she'd left behind. So long ago, she wasn't sure she remembered how to navigate it. But maybe that was exactly why Robert Blackwood needed her. Maybe the view from the bottom was worth something after all. The next morning, she made her decision. She called David Richardson's number and left a simple message. "I want to see the apartment." What she didn't know was that across town, Robert Blackwood was staring out his office window, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. His business was hanging by a thread, his daughter still wouldn't take his calls, and now he'd potentially dragged an innocent woman into his mess. But something about Margaret Hayes had reminded him of who he used to be, before the money and power changed him. If he was going to rebuild his life, maybe he needed someone who understood what it meant to lose everything. Neither of them realized that their decision to trust each other would uncover secrets that had been buried for 30 years, secrets that would change both their lives in ways they could never imagine. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a brick building that had seen better days, but it was clean and the locks worked. Margaret stood in the doorway, afraid to cross the threshold. It had been 5 years since she'd lived anywhere with 4 walls and a door that locked from the inside. "The previous tenant left some furniture," David said, flipping on the lights. "Basic stuff, but functional." The living room was small but bright, with windows that actually opened. A couch that had definitely seen better days but didn't smell like anything offensive. A coffee table with only minor scratches. In the corner, a small television that looked like it was from the previous decade. "Kitchen's through here." David led her past a dining area just big enough for 2 people. The kitchen was compact but had everything she'd need. Refrigerator, stove, even a dishwasher. Rent's paid for the first 6 months. After that, it comes out of your salary if you decide to take the job. Margaret ran her hand along the counter, remembering what it felt like to have a place to prepare her own food. What exactly would I be doing? This community liaison position? Honestly, Mr. Blackwood is still figuring that out. He knows he wants to do something meaningful with the company's resources, something that actually helps people, instead of just looking good in press releases. David leaned against the doorframe. He mentioned setting up job training programs, housing initiatives, maybe partnering with existing shelters and service organizations. "And he thinks I'm qualified for that because I've been homeless?" "He thinks you're qualified because you understand the system from both sides. You had a career before, you know how businesses work. But you also know what it's like when the system fails." David handed her a set of keys. "Plus, he was impressed by something you said that night." "What was that?" "That survival is a full-time job, but it doesn't have to be a life sentence." David smiled. "Those were your exact words, according to his notes." Margaret took the keys, feeling their weight in her palm. Such small things, but they represented something she'd thought was gone forever. Choice, control over her own space. "When would he want me to start?" "Whenever you're ready." "But Maggie," David's expression grew serious, "I need you to understand what you're walking into. The investigation into Marcus Chen's embezzlement is just getting started. There will be media attention, and not all of it will be kind to Mr. Blackwood or anyone associated with him." "What kind of media attention?" "The kind that sells newspapers. Rich businessman loses company to trusted partner. Some reporters will make it sound like Robert was incompetent or complicit. Others will dig into his personal life, his divorce, his estrangement from his daughter. David paused. "And if they find out about you, they'll want to know everything. Your past, how you ended up on the streets, why Robert decided to help you." Margaret felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. She'd worked so hard to become invisible, and now this opportunity meant stepping back into the light. What if I'm not ready for that kind of scrutiny? "Then you should walk away now before you get in too deep." David's voice was gentle but honest. Robert would understand. He's not doing this to make you uncomfortable. That evening, Margaret sat on her new couch, takeout containers spread across the coffee table, Chinese food from the place down the street, eaten with real silverware instead of plastic forks. She'd taken a shower in her own bathroom, put on clothes that she'd washed in her own washing machine. It felt like playing house, like this couldn't possibly be real. Her phone rang. The cheap cell phone David had given her, with Robert's number programmed in. She'd been expecting this call. "Hello? Maggie? It's Robert. I hope I'm not calling too late." His voice sounded stronger than it had that night in the rain, more like the successful businessman she'd imagined. "No, it's fine. I'm just settling in. How's the apartment?" "It's perfect. Thank you." She curled up on the couch, tucking her feet under her. David explained about the job and about the investigation. Robert was quiet for a moment. "Are you having second thoughts?" "Honestly, I'm terrified. It's been so long since I had anything to lose." Margaret looked around the apartment, at the life she could build here. "But I keep thinking about what you said that night, about losing yourself when you lose everything else. I've been thinking about that too. About how I got so caught up in building something that I forgot why I was building it in the first place." Robert's voice grew thoughtful. "My father started this company with nothing but determination and a sewing machine. He wanted to create jobs, to build something that would last. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that." "What happened with your partner, Marcus?" 20 years of friendship, apparently built on lies." The bitterness in Robert's voice was unmistakable. "The FBI thinks he's been skimming money since we first went public. Small amounts at first, but getting bolder over time. When I started asking questions about some discrepancies, he decided to take everything he could and disappear." "But he didn't disappear." "No, he's still here, still pretending to be my friend while his lawyers negotiate his immunity deal." Robert's laugh was harsh. "The worst part is, I trusted him with everything. He knew about my problems with Catherine, about my relationship with Jessica. He had access to all of it. Catherine's your ex-wife. Divorce was finalized last year. She said living with me was like being married to the company instead of a person. She wasn't wrong." Robert paused. "And Jessica is my daughter. 26 years old and thinks I'm a workaholic who never had time for her." Margaret thought about her own father, who'd worked double shifts at the factory to support their family. She'd understood even as a child that his absence was an act of love, not neglect. Maybe she just needs time to see it differently. Maybe. But Marcus poisoned that well too. Told her things about why Catherine and I really divorced, made it sound like I was having affairs, neglecting my family for personal gain. Robert's voice broke slightly. "The truth is, I was just scared. Scared of failing the people who depended on me. So I worked harder and harder, thinking that would solve everything." "Have you tried calling her, Jessica?" "Every day for 2 weeks. She won't take my calls." Robert sighed heavily. "Her assistant says she's too busy, but I know she's just avoiding me. Can't say I blame her." Margaret found herself wanting to comfort him, this powerful man who sounded as lost as she'd felt on her worst days. What if you wrote to her instead? Not an email, but a real letter, something she'd have to hold in her hands. "You think that would work?" "I think sometimes we need proof that someone took the time to really think about us. A letter says you cared enough to sit down and choose your words carefully." Margaret remembered the letter Robert had written to her, how real it had felt compared to all the official documents and forms she'd dealt with over the years. Besides, what do you have to lose? 3 weeks into her new life, Margaret was beginning to understand the rhythm of working in an office again. Robert had set up a small workspace for her near his assistant's desk, close enough that she could learn how the business operated, but far enough from the executive floor that she didn't feel completely out of place. Her first official task was to research existing programs that helped people transition from homelessness to stable housing and employment. What she found was a system that was well-intentioned but completely disconnected from reality. "Look at this," she said to Robert during their weekly meeting. spreading printouts across his conference table. This program requires people to have a permanent address before they can apply for job training. This one requires proof of employment before they'll help with housing. It's like they designed these things to keep people out instead of helping them in. Robert leaned back in his chair, studying the documents. What would you do differently? Start with the assumption that people want to work, want to improve their lives. They just need someone to take a chance on them. Margaret pointed to one particularly frustrating form. This application asks for 5 references, including at least 2 from previous employers. If someone's been on the streets for years, where are they supposed to get employment references? So, what's the solution? Margaret had been thinking about this for days. What if we created our own program? Started small, maybe with a dozen people. Provide housing first, no strings attached, except that they participate in job training and life skills classes. Give them a chance to stabilize before we expect them to perform. That sounds expensive. Less expensive than the current system, which spends money on bureaucracy instead of actual help. Margaret pulled out another sheet of paper, covered with her handwriting. I ran some numbers. If we converted one of your smaller buildings, provided basic furnished apartments and wraparound services, we could house and train 12 people for about the same cost as the city spends processing applications for programs that don't work. Robert studied her proposal, his expression unreadable. You put a lot of thought into this. I've had a lot of time to think about what might have helped me when I needed it most. Margaret felt a flutter of nervousness. Is it too ambitious? Actually, I think it's not ambitious enough. Robert smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. What if we made it 24 people, 2 buildings? Margaret felt something shift inside her chest, a feeling she'd almost forgotten. Hope mixed with purpose, the sense that she could actually make a difference. You'd really do that? Maggie, in the past month you've shown me more about actual leadership than I learned in 20 years of business school. Robert stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city. I've been so focused on profit margins and market share that I forgot the whole point of business is to create value for people. Their conversation was interrupted by Robert's assistant, Linda, who knocked and entered, looking flustered. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation downstairs. A woman claiming to be your daughter. Robert went very still. Jessica's here? She's with building security. Says she won't leave until she talks to you. Linda glanced at Margaret uncertainly. Should I have them send her up? Yes. No, wait. Robert ran his hand through his hair, suddenly looking every bit as nervous as Margaret felt most days. Maggie, would you mind? I'll give you privacy. Margaret started gathering her papers. Actually, I was wondering if you'd stay, if you're comfortable with that. Robert's request surprised them both. You're the one who suggested I write to her. Maybe you could help me not mess this up completely. Before Margaret could respond, the elevator doors opened and a young woman stepped out. Jessica Blackwood had her father's dark hair and determined jawline, but her green eyes were full of anger and hurt. She wore a designer suit that probably cost more than Margaret made in a month, but she carried herself like someone ready for a fight. Dad. Jessica's voice was cool, professional. Then she noticed Margaret. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were in a meeting. Jessica, this is Margaret Hayes. She's been helping me with a new project. Robert's introduction was careful, neutral. Maggie, this is my daughter. Margaret stood, extending her hand. It's nice to meet you, Jessica. Your father talks about you all the time. Jessica shook her hand, studying Margaret with sharp eyes. Are you the homeless woman the newspapers are talking about? The one Dad supposedly saved? The question hit Margaret like a slap. Not because it was cruel, but because it reduced her entire existence to a single moment. I prefer to think we saved each other. How convenient. Jessica turned back to her father. I got your letter, all 12 pages of it. And? Robert's voice was carefully controlled. And I want to know if any of it was true. About Marcus lying to me, about the real reasons you and Mom divorced. Jessica crossed her arms. Because if you're just trying to manipulate me into feeling sorry for you, every word was true. Robert's voice was quiet but firm. I can prove it if you need me to. I might just take you up on that. Jessica glanced at Margaret again. No offense, but I'd like to speak to my father alone. Margaret started to leave, but Robert caught her arm gently. Actually, I think Maggie should hear this too, because what I'm about to tell you involves her more than you know. Jessica's eyebrows shot up. What are you talking about? Robert walked to his desk and pulled out a thick file folder. 3 days ago, I had our private investigator do a background check on Maggie. Standard procedure for anyone joining the company. He looked at Margaret apologetically. I should have asked your permission first, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't putting you in any danger by associating you with our legal troubles. Margaret felt her stomach drop. What did you find? I found something that changes everything. Robert opened the file and pulled out several photographs. These are pictures from our company Christmas parties in the 1970s, back when my father was still running things. He handed Margaret the first photograph. It showed a large gathering of people in what looked like a hotel ballroom. Men in suits, women in cocktail dresses, everyone smiling for the camera. But it was one face in the background that made Margaret's breath catch. That's my mother! She pointed to a woman in a simple black dress standing near the kitchen doors. That's Rose Hayes. She worked for us for 3 years, Robert said softly. 1975 to 1978. According to the employment records, she was my father's personal secretary. Margaret stared at the photograph, her mind racing. She never told me she worked for your family. There's more. Robert handed her another document. This is her termination record. She was let go in August of 1978, just 3 months before you were born. The implication hit Margaret like a physical blow. She sank into her chair, the photograph trembling in her hands. Are you suggesting that your father... I'm not suggesting anything, but the timing is interesting. Robert's voice was careful. And there's something else. The investigator found correspondence between your mother and my father that continued for several years after she stopped working for us. Just birthday cards and Christmas notes, but they were personal. Jessica looked between them, confusion clear on her face. What are you two talking about? Margaret couldn't speak. She was staring at the photograph of her mother, trying to reconcile the woman she remembered with this professional-looking person in an expensive dress. Her mother had always been mysterious about Margaret's father, claiming only that he was a good man who couldn't be part of their lives. Dad, you're scaring me. What is this about? Jessica moved closer to the desk. Robert took a deep breath. I think there's a chance that Maggie might be your half-sister. The silence in the room stretched so long that Margaret could hear her own heartbeat. Jessica stared at her father like he'd lost his mind, while Margaret clutched the photograph of her mother so tightly her knuckles went white. That's impossible, Jessica whispered. You can't just drop a bombshell like that without proof. The proof is circumstantial, but compelling. Robert pulled out more documents from the file. DNA testing would give us a definitive answer, but the timeline fits perfectly. Your grandfather and Rose Hayes had a close working relationship that clearly extended beyond professional boundaries. Margaret finally found her voice. My mother told me my father was married to someone else. She said he was a good man who couldn't leave his family, but that he loved me even though he couldn't be part of my life. Her hands shook as she set down the photograph. She used to say I had his eyes. Jessica moved closer, studying Margaret's face with new intensity. Your eyes are brown. Grandpa James had brown eyes too. She sank into a chair, looking stunned. This is insane. Yesterday I came here to confront my father about lying to me, and now you're telling me I might have a sister I never knew existed. Half-sister, Robert corrected gently. If the timeline is accurate. If, Margaret emphasized. We don't know anything for certain yet. But even as she said it, pieces were falling into place in her mind. Her mother's occasional mysterious comments about having worked for important people, the way she'd always seemed to know things about business and high society that didn't match their modest lifestyle. The expensive jewelry she'd kept hidden in a shoebox, pieces she'd claimed were gifts from Margaret's father. There's something else, Robert continued, his voice hesitant. The investigator found records of financial support, monthly payments from a trust account set up by my father, made to your mother from 1978 until her death in 2015. Margaret's world tilted. What kind of payments? Enough to cover basic living expenses, rent, utilities, groceries. It was set up to look like alimony from a previous marriage, but the investigator couldn't find any record of your mother being married before she had you. So he was supporting us this whole time. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. All those years when we struggled, when Mom worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat, he was helping. It looks that way. And when she got sick, the payments increased to cover her medical expenses. Robert's expression was pained. I'm sorry, Maggie. If you'd known what? That your father had an affair, that I existed. Margaret stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. This doesn't change anything. I'm still the same person I was an hour ago. But it changes everything about why you're here, Jessica said quietly. If you're really my half-sister, then Dad didn't just help a random homeless woman out of guilt. He helped family. Margaret spun around. I don't want to be here because of an obligation. I want to be here because I earned it. You did earn it, Robert said firmly. Everything you've accomplished in the past month, the program you designed, the insights you've brought to the company, none of that has anything to do with DNA. You've proven your worth independently. The argument was interrupted by Linda's voice over the intercom. Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry, but there are reporters in the lobby. They're asking questions about Miss Hayes and demanding to speak with you. Robert's face went pale. How many? At least 6. Security is keeping them contained, but they say they're not leaving without a statement. Jessica looked between her father and Margaret. What kind of questions are they asking? Linda's voice was tight with worry. They want to know if it's true that Mr. Blackwood is having a relationship with a homeless woman, and whether the company is paying her salary as some kind of hush money related to the embezzlement investigation. Margaret felt sick. They think we're having an affair. Apparently someone leaked information about your employment and housing arrangement. They're spinning it as a scandal within a scandal. Robert was already moving toward his coat. I need to get down there and set the record straight. No. Margaret's voice was sharp. If you go down there and deny everything, it'll just make them more suspicious. And if they find out about the possible family connection, it'll be even worse. Then what do you suggest? Margaret looked at Jessica, then back at Robert. An idea was forming. Dangerous, but potentially brilliant. We tell them the truth. All of it. Are you insane? Jessica stood up. If you go public with this family connection theory, every detail of our lives will be scrutinized. Every old photograph, every business decision, every personal relationship. They're going to dig anyway, Margaret said. At least if we control the narrative, we can focus on what really matters. Which is what? Robert asked. The program, the people we're trying to help. The fact that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships create the most meaningful change. Margaret turned to face both of them. Look, I know this is crazy. 3 months ago, I was sleeping on a park bench, and now I'm potentially part of your family while helping design social programs for a major corporation. It's the kind of story that either inspires people or makes them cynical about rich people's motives. And you think we should gamble on inspiration? Jessica asked. I think we should gamble on truth. Margaret pulled out her phone. I'm going to call David and ask him to set up a press conference tomorrow morning. We'll present the whole story, answer every question they have, and let the public decide what they think. Robert stared at her. That's either very brave or very stupid. Probably both, but I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being ashamed of where I've been or uncertain about where I'm going. Margaret looked at the photograph of her mother one more time. If James Blackwood was my father, then maybe I inherited more than just his eyes. Maybe I inherited his courage too. The press conference was held in the lobby of Blackwood Industries the next morning. Margaret had spent half the night writing her statement with input from both Robert and Jessica. The 3 of them sat at a table facing dozens of cameras and reporters, united in their decision to face the speculation head-on. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert began, thank you for coming. We've asked you here because there's been considerable speculation about recent changes at Blackwood Industries, and we believe transparency is the best policy. He introduced Margaret and Jessica, explaining the basic facts of how he and Margaret had met. Then Margaret took over, her voice steady despite the bright lights and clicking cameras. 3 months ago, I was homeless. Not because I was lazy or addicted or mentally ill, but because a series of circumstances beyond my control left me with no safety net. She looked directly into the cameras. Robert Blackwood saved my life that night, but not in the way you might think. Yes, he pulled me away from traffic. But more importantly, he saw me as a human being worth saving. She went on to describe the job offer, the housing assistance, and the social program they were developing together. Some of you are wondering if this is all some elaborate public relations scheme. I can tell you it's not. Mr. Blackwood didn't help me to improve his image. He helped me because he remembered what it meant to care about individual human beings, not just abstract business goals. Then came the hard part. Robert took over, explaining about the investigation into Margaret's background and the possible family connection. We don't know for certain yet whether Margaret is my half-sister. We've both agreed to DNA testing, and those results should be available within the week. But I want to be clear about something. It doesn't matter. The room erupted with questions, but Robert held up his hand. It doesn't matter, because Margaret earned her position here based on her insights, her compassion, and her innovative thinking about how businesses can actually help solve social problems. If she's family, that's a wonderful discovery. If she's not, she's still exactly the kind of person our company needs to fulfill its mission. Jessica spoke last, her voice clear and confident. I've spent the last 2 years angry at my father for what I thought were his misplaced priorities. Yesterday I learned that much of my anger was based on lies told to me by someone I trusted. But more importantly, I learned that sometimes the people who challenge us most are the ones who help us grow most. She looked at Margaret with genuine warmth. Sister or not, Margaret Hayes has reminded our family what it means to use privilege responsibly. The social programs she's designing will help hundreds of people transition from homelessness to stable, productive lives. That's not a publicity stunt. That's a legacy worth building. The questions came fast and skeptical after that. Reporters wanted to know about the embezzlement investigation, about Robert's divorce, about Margaret's past employment history. But something had shifted in the room's energy. The story was no longer about scandal and suspicion. It was about redemption and possibility. One reporter asked Margaret directly, "Even if you are related to the Blackwoods, don't you think it's problematic for a formerly homeless person to suddenly be designing programs for the homeless? Doesn't that smack of tokenism?" Margaret had been prepared for this question. "I think it would be tokenism if I were just a figurehead, brought in to make the company look good without actually contributing to policy decisions. But I'm not. I've spent the last month researching best practices, consulting with service providers, and developing detailed implementation plans. My lived experience informs my work, but it doesn't define my qualifications." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "The current system for helping homeless individuals transition to stable housing and employment has a success rate of less than 30%. The program I've designed, based on housing first principles and wraparound support services, has shown success rates of over 70% in pilot programs elsewhere. Judge me on those numbers, not on where I used to sleep." After the press conference, the three of them retreated to Robert's office, emotionally drained but oddly exhilarated. "Well," Jessica said, collapsing into a chair, "that was either the smartest thing we've ever done or the dumbest." "We'll find out soon enough," Robert replied, loosening his tie. "Maggie, are you okay? I know that wasn't easy." Margaret was staring out the window at the city below, thinking about all the people who were invisible to most of the world. "I keep thinking about Sarah and Tommy and Mrs. Chen, all the people I left behind in the park. How do I explain this to them? How do I convince them I haven't forgotten where I came from?" "By making sure the programs actually work," Jessica said simply. "By proving that this opportunity wasn't wasted on you." 3 days later, the DNA results came back. Margaret was indeed James Blackwood's daughter, Robert's half-sister. But by then, the media narrative had already shifted. The story wasn't about a scandalous family secret anymore. It was about a company taking genuine steps to address social problems, led by someone who understood those problems from personal experience. The pilot housing program launched 6 weeks later, with Margaret as its director. 24 previously homeless individuals moved into furnished apartments in 2 converted Blackwood buildings. Each resident participated in job training, life skills classes, and had access to mental health and substance abuse counseling as needed. By the end of the first year, 21 of the original 24 residents had found permanent employment. 18 had moved into independent housing. 3 had started their own small businesses with microloans from a fund Margaret had established. But the real transformation wasn't measured in statistics. It was visible in the way Margaret carried herself now, confident and purposeful. In the way, Jessica had returned from London permanently to help expand the program to other cities. In the way, Robert had restructured his entire company around the principle that profit and social responsibility weren't mutually exclusive. Standing in the lobby of the First Blackwood Community Centre, watching residents celebrate the program's first anniversary, Margaret thought about that rainy night when she'd pulled a broken man from the edge of traffic. She'd thought she was saving his life. What she'd actually done was save them both. Robert approached her carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Penny, for your thoughts. I was thinking about that night when we met. You said you'd lost everything." Margaret accepted the coffee gratefully. "But maybe you just lost the things that were keeping you from finding what actually mattered." "And what's that?" Margaret gestured toward the celebration around them, where formerly homeless individuals were mingling with company executives, where Jessica was teaching a group of children how to use the computer lab, where Mrs. Chen from the park was proudly showing off her new job as the center's community coordinator. "Family," she said simply. "Not just the one you're born into, but the one you choose to build." Robert smiled, the same genuine expression she'd first glimpsed in his office months ago. "I couldn't have said it better myself, sister." The word still felt strange and wonderful. Sister. Margaret had spent so many years believing she was alone in the world that she'd had to be entirely self-sufficient to survive. Learning that she'd had a father who cared about her, even from a distance, and a brother who was committed to honoring that care, had changed something fundamental in how she saw herself and her place in the world. "You know what the best part is?" she asked Robert. "What's that?" "Tomorrow morning, 24 new people move into the second building, and next month, we break ground on the job training center. And next year, Jessica thinks we can expand to 5 more cities." Margaret grinned. "I finally understand what you meant about building something that lasts." As the celebration continued around them, Margaret caught sight of her reflection in the lobby's glass doors. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the person who'd sat on that park bench less than 2 years ago. This woman stood tall, spoke with authority, and had the confidence of someone who knew her worth. But in her eyes, there was still the same compassion that had recognized a broken man's pain and refused to let him surrender to it. That compassion had saved them both, and now it was saving others too. Outside, the city sparkled with lights and possibilities. Inside, a new kind of family celebrated what could be built when people chose to see each other's potential instead of their limitations. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning.